Hello. I would like to thank the council, the staff, and the members of the community for allowing me to present to you this evening. Ending homelessness and poverty today is often considered impossible. However, I would like to demonstrate that it requires no economic or technological marvel at all, and I'd like to show you this evening how it can be done. What's more, we can do it in ways that have a positive impact on the soil, the water, and the air. According to the 2015 point-in-time count, there are just over 200 citizens of Arcata who are currently homeless. According to the most recent U.S. Census data, 41% of the citizens of Arcata are living in poverty, up from 30% in 1990. This means that they're living on $1,005 a month or less. For most, this does not lead to good long-term outcomes. What I'm proposing to you this evening is that we start using low-cost, sustainable, and collaborative options to assist the environment and the people in need, and that's what I'm here to speak with you about this evening. My name is Jamie Delson. I'm broker-owner of North Country Real Estate here in Arcata. I've lived here locally since I was 14 years old, and I've been working on this project. I'm here to present to you this evening my entire life.
Jamie, let me just, it might be good if you could speak into the microphone, because there's like 1,000 or so people watching this on TV, and you'll go in and out of your audio, and they won't be able to understand what you're saying as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying.
Thanks, sure.
I would also like to thank Gio and Kalindi and Desiree, who have assisted me along the way. And I would also like to introduce now Kalindi, who will introduce to us the Sustainable Village.
So can we get to slide?
We can now, yeah, now you can turn to the next slide. There we go.
So here are the references to the unfortunate state of economic affairs that Jamie referred to in the introduction. The Sustainable Village provides an opportunity to help house people in tiny homes and cottages. It also empowers villagers to start businesses, thereby employing people who are homeless or of low income. By providing a live-work model, our goal is to grow our own food and produce many of our own necessities of life in order to reduce costs and live sustainably, while also empowering villagers to shape our community. The population TSV will serve is right here. A third of our villagers will comprise of community members who are currently homeless. A third will be of community members who are on the edge financially and are likely to face harder times ahead. And a third of our villagers will be community members who simply have a passion for the success of the project. These proportions may evolve over time to serve existing need. There will also be dedicated area for people to camp who intend to stay for only a limited time and who fit our target population. The Sustainable Village will be a place to learn and teach the art of low-cost, environmentally sound, sustainable living. For people who desire an emotionally supportive environment that allows for safe self-expression and that potentiates recovery from many forms of trauma. And where members of the wider community may come and volunteer some time in exchange for anything from vegetables to an array of other goods and services. Main features. TSV may be started on a shoestring budget with no ongoing funding necessary after 5 or so years, due to our producing for ourselves, cost lowering, and our small business operations strategy. It may be scaled up to meet existing and future need due to the desirability and affordability of this approach. TSV would be a place that utilizes its infrastructure to facilitate a range of small businesses to earn funds to cover costs and funds for villagers. TSV shall be a travel destination for those that wish to learn, participate, and perhaps replicate this in their communities anywhere around the world. Project details. The Sustainable Village will not place a demand on already limited existing low-income housing or living wage employment opportunities. It would provide the opportunity to use one's own labor, time, and skills to improve one's own life and that of their neighbor and the wider community, as well as building camaraderie, reliability, trust, skill, well-being, and wealth. A goal is for our villagers to gain equity interest in their own homes. Local and sustainable production of day-to-day necessities reduces environmental impacts. TSV is capable of operating on and rehabilitating marginal land. How will we do this? I will let Gio explain.
Thank you, Kalindi, and hello to all. My name is Gio, and let us proceed by describing the Plot 1, Phase 1 plan. This represents a 2-acre parcel of land that has been designed to house a sample population of 30 villagers. Phase 1 is an emergency iteration of TSV. It is designed to foster the most basic of human cultural needs. To begin with, each villager will get an area to put one's tent, car, trailer, or bus in order to sleep, eat, and keep oneself and one's keepsakes secure. There will be bathroom facilities through the use of porta potties until such funds may be acquired to build permanent installations. And the same will be true for showers, wherein we'll utilize a rental or build our own site-built shower trailer. The same rental process will occur for creating our administration office, where we'll commence the screening process for individuals to become villagers. This process will allow for our target population to be held first and foremost, and of course, ensure villager safety. There will also be sleeping quarters within the administration office to allow for a team of village hosts to revolve that will be present and on call for 24 hours a day. At first, there will be a rudimentary installation, not quite yet. At first, there will be a rudimentary installation of a garden that with time, the villagers will create into a prospering garden and greenhouse and orchard and a living labyrinth as a mental health component and wellness tool. This will also potentiate villagers that the ability to generate income by selling excess crops at local farmers markets or local shops, online, and so on. As time progresses, villagers will be guided to creating a workshop facility where various activities from construction and tinkering to various arts and trade skills will be shared. A fire pit will also be built. And with encouragement, harness as much of a jovial encirclement as possible and foster village communication that allows us all to express our ideas in a safe and respectful environment. Of course, a parking area for our villagers in the greater community. And in addition, there will also be an area specifically created for the camping of non-villagers and visitors alike, who may not intend to stay long, however, they qualify within our target population. This project, of course, is dependent on water and energy. And so our initial infrastructure will require installations of services from institutions such as city water, PG&E, and finally a suitable and code-compliant gray water system. Next slide, please. Which leads us to our next slide. Here we see a breakdown of costs for the infrastructure in an emergency iteration of TSV. Sorry, I need to stay on the mic. You're right. I'll bring it with me. In this shoestring budget, we provide totals for everything from administration to gray water, and have that total come to a range between $22,000 and $64,000 a year. Remember, this is for 30 villagers. Jamie, would you mind speaking a little bit to why there is a range in our totals and address how might we go about achieving that lower cost?
Absolutely. This is a little bit unconventional, except in the context of an emergency iteration. In an emergency situation, there'd be no difficulty in bringing water and electricity from neighboring parcels. And the costs here on the lower end are based on a friendlier relationship with our neighbors, where we make a negotiation to run a water line as PG&E sub-panel from their property to this property on an emergency temporary basis. And that would allow this to move forward with less impediment, and that's what those numbers refer to.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. So, of course, you know, if we need to pull strings and just get this off the bat, we can call on our neighbors in our community, which is a great thing. But if we have the money available and we're able to build our own infrastructure, that reflects the higher range of the cost. To proceed. As we continue down this slide, we have an annual breakdown of what the infrastructure would cost per villager that I will speak more to in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. Here in this slide, we see a breakdown of costs for the operations budget in an emergency iteration of TSD, covering costs such as insurance to our utility bills, administration, and a budget to cover any potential miscellaneous costs, coming to an approximate total of 60 grand. As you see in this slide, we have the cost broken down yet again to illustrate how much it would cost for the life of each villager. Next slide, please. Which brings us to our cumulative totals. In this slide, we see a cumulative breakdown for years 1 through 3, which covers operating costs and the essentials for basic human need. Given that food is provided through a myriad of our community action groups, like Food Not Bombs, Food for People, Cal Fresh, STEP, donations, and so on. When we view these numbers, we see that on an annual basis, at our lowest price, the cost for a life of each villager would be less than $3,000 a year. That's less than $300 a month, less than $8 a day. Given that we evolve successfully in our phases according to our plan we are proposing today, during years 2 and 3, we intend to construct our Plot 1, Phase 2. Next slide. In this slide, we see Phase 2, where villagers are building tiny homes or cottages to replace their tents, if they prefer, or yurts, trailers, and any other possible temporary structures that have been built. In Phase 2, the garden and greenhouse, orchard, and pond areas are expanded and improved upon, with the addition of facilities that house the aquaponics area and renewable energy generators. This will be for food for villagers. That could be made for sale in shops and markets and for those members of our wider community that may also be in need. In Phase 2, we get to see the workshop area evolve and get one or more buildings to expand our trade practices, provide classes, store tools and bigger tools, and do projects out of the sheer desire to create. We'll get to see our porta potties replaced with permanent systems, our commercial kitchens built, upgrades in equipment and administration facilities, and probably so much more than through the donations and kindness and materials from within and throughout our greater community. Next slide. On a shoestring budget and with donated labor, this slide exhibits the upgrades we intend to bring to the Sustainable Village, costing in the ballpark of $200,000 each year during years 1 and 2. By creating all the necessities of life, we drive the daily living costs down dramatically, that by years 4 and 5, we see that aside from the annual operating costs, infrastructure costs drop off. Villagers sustain themselves through the fruits of their labor, and we begin to see from the breakdown here that the costs for villagers by year 4 and 5 total less than $25,000 a year. So to return to the image of plot plan, Phase 2, this is also the formal beginning of the TSV Sustainability and Cost Lowering Initiative. It is designed so that villages can begin utilizing low-cost, appropriate technologies to begin producing more and more of the goods and services that they need. In this way, lowering their dependence on income while maximizing their potential to make profit. Phase 2 is also the beginning of our small business initiative. This initiative allows villagers to utilize our infrastructure and also run their small businesses in a wide range of endeavors, suiting their skills and interests. And in this way, forging their means to covering village operating costs, and forging a way to generate an income for themselves, as well as provide potential jobs for their neighbors and the greater community. To speak more on this initiative, Jamie will conclude our presentation, and I turn it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio. Cottage industries are a key element of the sustainable village, producing for villagers themselves and also earning funds to cover the village's operating costs and other needs and wants. This insulates us from the ups and down trends of employment, as well as the costs of living. Small businesses are whatever the villagers select. They could be based on the infrastructure we use to produce for the village. However, it is not limited to that. One could be a part of the sustainable village, yet participate in any career they wish. A real estate broker, a fireman, a doctor, a politician. Next slide. So this slide here is a comparison to the other competitive option, which is currently the Housing First model. Previously it was rapid rehousing. Previous to that it was transitional housing. And that's represented on this graph by the red bar going down. And what we have here across a 10-year period is with 30 people spending $500 a month for rent and $500 a month for everything else in life, which is a below poverty level income. If you accumulate that, that's $360,000 for 30 people living per year at $1,000 a month. What we see here all the way across is if there's no inflation, those costs remain the same. Now, above the center line, what we have here is income. And if you look above each of the red lines, there is our projected income of what a homeless or a person who's on the edge might earn. And what this is derived from is three categories. First, we're saying that some of these people don't have any income at all. Some of these people are on SSI and SSDI, and they may earn, on average, about $650 a month. And then there's approximately 50% of this population who don't qualify for SSI and who do earn some income, and how much they earn really varies somewhat. It could be as much as, well, $1,000 a month and still fall into this category. So we rounded it off and said, on average, across this whole population, they're probably going to be earning about $400 a month on average across them all. And so you'll see that as a positive income for villagers in the sustainable village and for people in the broader community. And as you can see, that's insufficient to cover the standard model of sustaining oneself. Now, if we go to the green arrow going down from the center line, you'll see that is what it costs for year one for the sustainable village in terms of operating costs and infrastructure, if you use a comparable model to the Housing First model. Whereas in our presentation up to this point, we were doing an emergency iteration that didn't try to make a comparison. Now we're making a comparison to other options. And so we see that our costs are fairly high in the first few years because we have infrastructure to establish, and we really don't rely on our infrastructure to produce necessities of life, so our costs are relatively high. But then as you see, by year 4 and going forward, our costs decline dramatically. And at the same time, our cottage industries that are more likely to be run by villagers and people who might not work well in the prevailing workforce yet can work at their own pace for things that they are passionate about, and begin to generate a little cottage industry income on top of, for example, their SSI. And so it begins to improve their life, both because their costs are low and they have a capability of earning more. If you'll turn to now the next two slides, first one from here, and then again, what we're going to see is here's the data that we used, and then go to the next slide, to compile, to present this cost comparison. So now these two, which I don't expect you to actually take in this quickly, it would be great if you can, but for time's sake, we're not going to go to do that. So now go back 2 slides to the initial, yes. So here what we have, as I've described, is a cost comparison, but now go down past the 2 slides to another slide. Here, now what we have is a going forward cost comparison, and you see that the red line representing the housing first type model, even if there's no inflation, costs cumulatively increase and increase and increase to the point after year 10, they spend over $3,600,000 on rent and basic necessities, whereas in the Sustainable Village, we're spending $826,000. And that difference, if they were to save, is an asset that could be used to take this from a pilot project on the city's property to property that is actually owned by the villagers, and in this way, this is serving as an opportunity zone to help people lift themselves up by their bootstraps and take this capital and be able to establish this again on land that they own. Okay, so now go, yes, is that the slide that's right before the ones we already covered? Yes, thank you, very good. Okay, so to wrap this up, at this phase, how does the city benefit from the Sustainable Village? As you see here, there's less homeless, better appearance of the city. Tourism would increase because there's less homeless around. And also the local businesses, they will present better with not having to struggle with the homeless population around them. I personally know about that from running a business in Arcata myself. Media coverage for our success of addressing an increasing problem of homelessness and reducing crime, increasing safety are all things that the city would benefit from the establishment of the Sustainable Village. Next slide. Okay, so here now we have some examples of already existing successful projects and also a brief history. So Loaves and Fishes is a Texas group of people who are in many ways the most established in what we're talking about. They do have tiny homes, and they also do have a certain amount of gardens and things like that. So they are a model for us in that way. Growing Power, it is a unique example. What it is in the inner city of Milwaukee and also another major inner city where they are famous for food deserts. These people have banded together and produced food for each other. And a unique thing about this is a relatively poor people's movement that have established a bit of a cross-class collaboration with Walmart, who has been kind enough to provide $1 million to establish this and further in their success. So Growing Power is a pretty special thing in that regard, in that their ability to raise funds for their quest. Square One, an opportunity village, we know about because of Andrew Keeban in his speech that he presented here not too long ago. It is, Square One is a low-cost rental housing that is provided for people to live in. Opportunity Village is a more less established, more camp-oriented. Square One is more well-established. Twin Oaks and Hummingbird are quite a different type of arrangement. They don't cater to the homeless, but they're relevant to point out here because they do work on collaborative producing their own necessities of life. And so that's why they're here as an example of that component. Now I'd like to touch on a little bit of our brief history, because this is far from a new thing. In the 20th century, this was probably one of the more famous advocates for this concept. He talked about intermediary technology villages that existed throughout, or that would be proposed to have existed throughout Africa. What they are is essentially the same thing as was presented here in the Sustainable Village. They're low-cost, intermediary technology that it breaks down, maybe repairable, as opposed to becoming a big, huge doorstop, which is famous throughout Africa. And so I wanted to touch on him because he, being a highly capable economist, is one of the stronger proponents for this course of action. And then to the next slide. Here, this is the largest grouping that I know of ever in the United States who have done such a thing like this. Throughout the Midwest, from like 1860 to 1890, there were literally millions of people in small homesteads collaborating together to produce their own necessities of life and to be a participant in the rest of their community. They absorbed a significant amount of the slave population. When people were lobbying for a fair wage and fair working hours, they supported them in their quest in that regard. They didn't have the internet at that time, but they did have 1,100 horse and buggies traveling throughout the Midwest, connecting people together to make this project work. And this is a beautiful thing to be educational in terms of how movements do succeed and also the stumbling blocks that they run into. This would be an excellent work to understand, to be able to avoid the stumbling blocks that they ran into so we don't run into them again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Now we have our request to the City of Arcata. What we're requesting is a contingent lease agreement. I would like to now have you refer to the last page of the little handout I gave to you, and this is the advice that was handed to you from your economic advice. I don't have that correct. The Arcata Economic Advisory Committee has advised the City Council, as you'll see in this section, and I will read it out loud to you. This, action item, presentation by Jamie Delson and Shay King on June 1st on the economic benefits of the Sustainable Village. The Sustainable Village is an alternative housing model to serve primarily low-income persons. This concept is to include small housing quarters with a separate kitchen and bathroom and shower facilities, along with commercial and industrial land use activities conducted by the residents and by the residents. The committee recommends the proponents further define the project and define and treat it as if it were starting a business. The action item is a motion by Hart and seconded by Woodward on a 4-0 vote. The committee encourages the staff to work with the Sustainable Village proponents regarding a potential lease agreement with the City of Arcata. And so that's what we're wanting to proceed with you here this evening. We're here this evening because we would like the council to direct staff to work with the Sustainable Village planners in negotiating a $1 a year lease agreement. This lease agreement would be for 2 acres of vacant land the city owns in the Alder Grove area and would be for a 5-year trial period renewed if all goes well. The contingencies, as we see this is a contingent lease agreement, are designed to protect both the city's and the Sustainable Village planners' interests alike. However, the lease contingencies are to be kept to a minimum, selected on the basis of legal limitation, liability, as well as health and safety. As long as the sustainable village continues to serve its target population in ways outlined, the program details are to be determined by TSV planners, staff, and advisory board. For example, we do not want possession until we have suitable policy of liability insurance. While simple possession may only require insurance, villagers living there will require a number of other things which will be contingencies that must be met before villagers live there. For example, access to running water, a gray water system, bathroom facilities, shower facilities, electricity, administration office, and a villager's post core. So that is our request, is to begin to establish what would be a lease agreement that would be both in the interests of our community, the council, the TSV planners, and the staff. And so that's what we're here to request you to the council, to guide staff to enter into that conversation. Thank you.
So with that, I'll bring it back to the council if anyone has anything you want to say, and then we'll open it up for public comment.
Yeah, I think I'd like to hear the public first.
Okay. Who does? Public first. Okay, I think I'm going to give everybody 2 minutes, because you can really say a lot in 2 minutes. Even though I was giving you 3, you're really only taking 2. So, so because probably there'll be a fair amount of people want to say something. So, with that, please form a line on the side that keeps it a little more flowing, the comments, and just step forward, and you can say your name if you want. I guess, I don't think that's a requirement anymore, is it? But it's nice for our minutes to make this look if you should want to do things.
Council members, staff, I'm Libby Maynard from the Ink People in Eureka, and you're probably wondering what I'm doing here. The Sustainable Village has recently become a Dreammaker project of the Ink People because of the potential to train people in crafts and artistic endeavors, design, maybe building their own houses, those kinds of things. So, we encompass the broad definition of arts and culture. And they have presented to our board, and our board has considered and accepted them unanimously. So we are standing behind the Sustainable Village. We will be the party to provide insurance and counsel as they move forward. So I just wanted to let you know that we are here and we are part of it.
Okay, thank you, Lynn.
Good evening, members of the council and the public of Arcata. My name is Michael Barnes. I'm 28 years old, and I've been studying communication and social advocacy at Humboldt State University for the past year. In this time, I have done extensive research into the homeless issues here in Humboldt State and across California and the United States, focusing specifically on student homelessness. I'm the Vice President of the Homeless Student Advocate Alliance at HSU, and throughout my studies and independent research, I've done a 5-day ethnography as a homeless student, and discovered plenty of resources, much like Jamie's, throughout this. And what I really want to stress today that perhaps wasn't included in Jamie's presentation or any of the public comments that follow me is the importance, the social significance of what Jamie's doing. Bringing these people together, I think, is incredibly important because there's so much stigmatization behind homeless people. And with all the different programs for homeless people in the area, I feel like this is avoided a lot, and a lot of Band-Aid solutions are come up with. I think that Jamie's program directly aligns with Arcata's values of sustainability, as well as Humboldt State's values of sustainability. And I feel like this program will inspire agency of homeless individuals and members of the community. Making these people feel important, I think, is the core of this problem. Thank you so much for hearing me.
A lot's been said that doesn't need to be repeated. My name is Nezzy Wade, and I'm the president of the board for Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives, AHA. I sent all of you an electronic copy of what I have for you today, and thank you for the assistance. Oh, okay. I just want to say first that I'm really happy and thankful that you're having this conversation, because it's something we've been having a conversation about for a long time with lots of different entities. And you know, in that packet last February, when your high priority goals came up, we wrote to you and said we were very interested in working with you on the low income and the opportunity village type model that might be possibly forthcoming because of your goals, and that we would stand ready and willing to work with the planning department and the city in whatever way we could to help develop and implement a tiny house village model. So thank you very much for talking about this. Thank you, Jamie, for presenting these ideas, because they're ideas we've been working with for a very long time. So some of the things that I would like to address that are probably a little different are, oh my gosh, the time is going. Well, maybe we would have an opportunity to meet and talk with you and make a presentation as well, because our project is substantially different in that we're not asking to retain or own the land, we're asking to utilize it and work in conjunction with the city to solve the city's issues around homelessness for chronically homeless people. And there are 400 of them in Arcata, and about 100 people living in their cars. And we have projects and proposals for a variety of things that would address that. So,
I would like to give my time for continuing, if that's okay.
I'm sure that's okay.
okay.
There you go.
Great, that's great. Some of the things that I would like to address are concerns that the community may have about having a village that is primarily of chronically homeless or people that have been living on the streets that are seeking a community. That is the resolve, the support of a community. People who have been living rough, and we've been working with them for the last number of years. We've been working also with engineers and Engineers Without Borders on developing a design for tiny houses that are efficient and low impact, sustainable in terms of heating and lighting distribution, and also in terms of waste disposal systems. So we are all about the same kinds of things in terms of sustainability and working with things that are low impact. The greatest thing is the impact on homelessness and the potential to affect a large number of people that will at least be addressed by a pilot project for a village. We're asking for the same parcel area that the Sustainable Village has also. So in that regard, I guess I would say that we would look at also a long-term lease for a low amount to be able to develop a project. But it would be a bridge for people in community at large with people in the community to work together, not maybe sometimes be present, but it's a community-driven initiative where people get to participate. And all the myths about stigmatizing people that we live with become decreased or de-emphasized when people actually have collaborative contact with people that they've otherwise held fearful or prejudiced about, and all of that. And in terms of sustainability, economic development is a huge part of what we're doing. And we've been working with people in the things that they're able to do that they would like to proliferate in a village setting. So thank you. Please invite us back.
Sure, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Jeanette Hartwood and this is Bob. So I learned recently that there's funding for housing, new housing for people who are on probation and have those kinds of issues. So I have been working with NESI, and you'll notice my sketch for a layout, and those 30 units would actually be called emergency sleeping cabins, because that's a fundable item. So based on that, what I was thinking up at Alder Grove, we could get government funding to put up a building that was individual units, studio apartments. The benefit of that is that that project would then bear all the cost of bringing in the utilities and also raising up the grade. If you go out there, you'll see how the parking lot for Desserts on Us is raised considerably off the ground, because in the winter, that whole thing is just, all done out 2 feet of water. So then you see, we could do, and working with NESI, we could actually do emergency sleeping cabins that wouldn't cost very much, because like Opportunity Village Eugene, they were successful because they used a paved lot and the utilities were already there down the side for those of us who've been there. And so then you can hook in. And that way you could have the Opportunity Village model with very little expense.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, City Council members, Mayor Nellis. My name is Rudy Ramp, resident of Arcata. I found the presentations on the Sustainable Village very interesting and informative. I found this also to be the case with the comments you just heard. The presentation and public comments lead me back to the 2017-18 City Council goals, policy objectives, and priority projects. In the City Council goals and policy objectives, there are a series of priority projects in support of these council goals and objectives, and there is one project which ties right into the presentation and public comments, and for which your Community Development Director, during the 2017-18 goal-setting study sessions, asked for council directives and directions. I am referring to High Priority Project number 09 under Community Development, which reads as follows. Continue to implement and develop amendments to the housing elements affordability strategies for all housing market levels. Identify incentives and potential sites for low-income housing options, inclusive of non-conventional housing types, for example, Opportunity Village. Develop a housing strategy. I am unaware that the Council has given the Community Development Director the aforementioned directives, and I believe the ideal opportunity to do so is tonight. Thank you for your attention.
I'm really nervous, so excuse me if I stumble, but yeah, I just wanted to speak out in support of this project and a lot of the other projects. I know there's a lot of people working on similar things. Y'all know affordable housing is a major issue, and there are a lot of benefits to doing something like this project, whatever form it takes. And there are also a lot of other places where this has worked, and I know there are some very understandable reservations with working with homeless population, but it's been proven to work in other places, and a lot of the NIMBYs have become supportive of it. So yeah, I just wanted to voice my support and encourage the city to support this and start a conversation with the community. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Edie Jessup, and I do work with AHA, but I am very excited that you have heard this really great presentation by Jamie and friends. And I think that and AHA's interest in chronic homelessness, which might require other kinds of supports than what Jamie is talking about in terms of making it successful for the residents, really just brings up the fact that numerous very affordable and sustainable projects need to be in the queue. Arcata has 400 homeless. We know that of that, there are about 800 Humboldt State students who are homeless. The need for more than 30 is just really apparent, and I hope that you will look at this as a leadership opportunity here in Humboldt County. Our rural needs are different, and you could be on the forefront of really solving some of the issues of too many of our folks living out in circumstances that none of us would want to live in. And the opportunity to make successful people out of our neighbors who don't happen to have housing is very exciting. And I hope that you see it that way and follow up with the opportunity for more kinds of solutions. Thank you.
I'd like to inform the City Council that this project incorporates probably my long-standing dream for inclusion and safety and security for the community as a whole. There's probably no better project for your consideration than this one. And it's a bold step forward. You haven't heard all the voices. There will be some opposition. There's long-standing frankly, ignorance and bigotry about this issue. And it's going to take bold leadership to build a new model against the open obstacle. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Winchell Dillenbeck. I'm also an AHA board member, and I encourage you on this dialogue. I agree with 98% of the presentation, and it is something that the county has ignored. I'm the former director of Consumer Credit Counseling. I know the housing issue, and I know from direct experience from all of the programs he mentioned, and what's going on with Housing First is they're never going to reach that goal. We need to take some steps forward to deal with affordable housing. Now, my eyes are wide open. You know, I would encourage you to move forward on a village. Is it going to solve your problems? No. You need a ton of villages to solve this problem. But we have to start moving forward in the right direction to address the affordable housing crisis. If we don't, it's going to get worse. And you know, I saw the Mad River Union article. Susan's been offered drugs on the plaza, and it's getting worse. And I talked to the police department here. Homelessness is increasing. People don't want to go to the plaza. I'm probably in that group sometimes. It's not an encouraging place unless you're molding it in with the community events, of which I'm also a board member of the North Country Fair. That brings you that model too. So I would highly encourage that you not accept any proposal, but bring the parties, because I think AHA, the one advantage with AHA is that it would put 30 homeless people and not 10 in a village, and you get yourself faster to there. It's not to ignore poverty, but we have to at least start to alleviate the problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that you want to
I'll try to make this really quick. I've been homeless for about 10 years here in Arcata. I'm an alumni from Humboldt State with a BA in psychology. I have a degree in law enforcement, and I've been through 3 universities in dance. I have extensive background. Saturday, a homeless woman had another woman attack my dog at 12:15 during farmer's market Saturday. She was about 23 years old. This homeless person who has been operating in a very bad way for quite a long time paid this girl. And she came up behind me and kicked my dog. I didn't see it. She stomped on her stomach with her shoes on. And it's beginning to become very, very unsafe out there. And we don't like the element that's out there right now that's causing all these problems in the last month and a half, 2 months, all this stuff that's happening. Many of the homeless are just fed up. We want to do something about it, but we feel a bit helpless. But we so appreciate the concern for us because we have so much to give. There are so many people that are talented, and we love each other out there. If we didn't, we'd be all gone. If we didn't care about each other and try to help each other day by day, and I've tried to be an example to show that love and concern and care is what makes each of us stronger and be able to, help each other. This is all about, the circle of love, the circle of responsibility and integrity and stepping up to the plate. I would be so, so, so thrilled. And I am so thrilled with just the idea of trying to help us. It's very rough out there. Very, very unpredictable. And many of us are artists. We would so just love to be able to do our art and benefit the community that has housed us for so many. My children are Ethiopian, Sudanese, Seminole, Blackfoot, Choctaw, French Canadian, Cherokee. I couldn't find any place on God's green earth except Arcata for my children to be raised like everybody else. They have high self-esteem, they're musicians and they're brilliant. And I just love Arcata just for that. No matter what has ever happened to me here in this community, that they allowed my children to flourish. And they're good people. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to address the council on this agenda item?
If I could ask for just one moment.
Oh, sure, come forward.
I'd like to say, I could call myself a Green Party member, I could call myself a bicyclist, but beyond anything else, I'm a human being. I know we're all in this together. We're facing an unprecedented challenge today. Not just, the social issues that have been brought forth, but ecological issues that I don't think have been spoken on enough. And I really think that it's important that we have government support, because in all actuality, there is not one educated member of the public that would be against this project. The main issue fighting this, which is change, this is positive change, and the main issue fighting it is ignorance. And I really think it's crucial. It's not just important, it's crucial that we have government support in moving forward with this positive change. I truly hope that all of us as human beings can come together and work to create some kind of, to put our heads together, to work for this change, to move forward, in whatever way possible. It doesn't need to go exactly by the lines, but we just need to do something. Because we are truly facing an unprecedented challenge today that is threatening the lives of not just the homeless, but everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else wish to address the council on this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, I'll close down public comment and bring it back to the council. Anyone have thoughts? You need to share?
I can share. I can see value in both projects. The Opportunity Village idea of the AHA, where it's just unhoused people, and the Sustainable Village project that's a mix. They both have value. I think the city has more than just 2 acres in Alder Grove that's zoned SB2 for homeless, principally permitted homeless facilities. My feeling is that Alder Grove parcels should be dedicated to homeless or unhoused people strictly. And the city, I can locate another parcel, but I can't talk about it, it's too close to my house. That has 2 acres that would work well for a sustainable village. So I think we can do both. And I'd like to see AHA's presentation. And after we see that, maybe we can gel it into what we'd like to do for an emergency style housing situation that doesn't follow the standard stick-built buildings. It's cheaper, and I think a pilot of any sort would be valuable. I think one component that would help us flex our rules as far as code and location would be if the city decided to call a shelter crisis. So if we would declare a shelter crisis like City of Eureka did, we would be able to flex things. For example, City of Eureka called a shelter crisis and came up with Betty Jim's metal boxes, okay, that are still being utilized at another location. I think if we declared a shelter crisis, we could get around some of the issues in how you build a campground, detached bedroom, tiny house, whatever you want to call it, place. So, shelter crisis, have Nessie Wade's presentation in front of us so we can look at that side of it. And then amongst ourselves and with the community, decide where could we put like both of these. Not necessarily at the same time, but you know, so there's where I am.
I have a lot of questions, actually. So, well, first off, thank you so much for this presentation. I know that a lot of work went into it, and thank you for all of you that have shown up to show support. I do feel this is not something that we're just going to solve in one night, and this is starting a conversation. And so let me, oh gosh, I have so many questions. And so please, I just want you to know that all my questions are really to like get clarity, and I understand the premise of this, but it's really just wanting to get clarity on a lot of the logistics, and having a clear sense of all these different aspects. So I don't know if now is the appropriate time for me to just go through a laundry list of questions, or
Seems as good a time as any.
okay. And forgive me, I'm looking at the table of contents, and so I guess my first question is, and forgive me if this was sent to me in an email, is there a full manual?
It's in the works, it's
Okay.
partially done. Yes.
Okay, and actually, Jamie, or whoever's going to answer questions, you're going to need to come up to the microphone so that the public that's watching from the comfort of their home, they can hear you.
So yes, it is in the works. We have a draft of it. We are wanting a dialogue. We're not wanting it written in stone. So we have a draft that's partially completed, and we'd like to share it with you in a separate meeting and get your feedback and have it evolve to be suitable for everybody.
Okay. Okay. So one question I have, there's a section titled here, illegal drugs and alcohol. One of the things I should be transparent in terms of my perspective. I used to work for Department of Health and Human Services, which has a housing first perspective. Part of what I like about the housing first model is that while it can be very high cost, there are no parameters over the access to housing. So there's no saying you have to be sober or clean. We're going to provide wraparound services to you while you're living in this housing in a more permanent setting. So I do think it's important for me to share that that's the lens that I'm coming from on this. So yeah, I guess my question is, what are the parameters around alcohol and drugs for the residents?
We also share the housing first model as you described. We have also are aware of law enforcement's concerns, and we don't have a good answer that melds both. I'd really love to learn more about how that works together. I've spoke with police chiefs in the past, and it's a disconnect at this point. And we want to encourage people not to use illegal drugs in the alleyways. We want safe places for them to be able to do what they're going to do, and we want to encourage law enforcement's support in a way that all this can happen consistent with their interests and the citizens' interests, like Housing First.
So my experience has been in the research that I've done on looking at these different types of models is that typically these types of models have, that they don't allow alcohol or drugs, and for very legitimate reasons. So my question is, if you have an example of how that would work, and if not, what is the game plan for caseworkers or other types of wraparound services to ensure that people are getting the support that they need?
Certainly, we invite groups like Hatcher and other, everything from mental health to other drug abuse services. We would want to meet with the ones we haven't met with to see if they're consistent with villagers' expectations. However, we encourage all of that within the village, and we've been in conversations with some of the providers. We encourage people to use whatever they're going to use within the confines of their home, yet we don't want to be in conflict with law enforcement. And so that's something that needs to be worked on in a way that is transparent and suitable for all.
Thank you. Is it all right if I just keep?
Yeah, I think so.
And I'm not trying to treat this like a congressional hearing.
I love the questions.
But yeah, it's just for the public's benefit and for our benefit.
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure we get all these questions out there.
Yes.
Let's see. I guess, one question I would have is, obviously Alder Grove is an industrial area, but there's, adjacent, properties and neighbors. And can you talk about the process you've done in engaging the neighborhood community to garner support for this project?
We haven't done anything yet, but it's very much within our program. Despite the fact that the SB2 zone does not require that, we don't feel that way at all. I know one of the immediate neighbors from my professional background. I have not spoken with them about it, but we intend to, if we were to get a schema support from you guys, such that it made sense to go to the neighbors, we would be speaking with them, explaining to them what we had in mind, asking them what their concerns are, and attempting to find a good resolution to whatever concerns that they might have.
I'll just say from my perspective, I do think that that's part of that preliminary work. And
Absolutely.
I know that you've done already a lot of work already, so I'm not saying that to discount what's already been done.
Absolutely.
But to me, representing an entire community, it's really helpful if you've done that background work to say, and look, we have, we talked to the other folks in the neighborhood and have gotten support. And of course, you don't need 100% support for lots of different things, but I know for these other types of models, that has been a really important piece of getting that community buy-in.
I fully agree with you, and we have every intention of doing that. if we could have done everything, that would have been one of the things we've done before the meeting.
I guess also, can you talk about, you know, how you're going to determine who qualifies for this, you know, in terms of if, you know, you're looking at unhoused folks or people that are at risk, what are the parameters for that, and are there any time limits? Is this considered transitional housing, or is this considered permanent, long-term, where someone can stay as long as possible?
The ultimate goal in the sustainable village concept is permanent housing. That isn't to say that people wouldn't be absolutely welcome to stay on a temporary basis, and obviously who's sufficiently temporary to be in the camping area. But we're not trying to set a lower limit or an upper limit on time frame. But for this population, what's missing is the long-term permanent housing. Because what happens is when you get a retirement age and you start to pay the rent, you become in a real bind. And so we're trying to overcome that through an equity interest, obviously not in the city-owned land, but in the tiny house initially. And as this concept goes forward, as others have spoken, this is not the only village that's necessary. And at some point there would be an equity interest as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I have a question about the costs, and thank you so much for like offering that breakdown and showing the different, you know, ranges based on if things are donated or not. You know, so I guess my question is, do you have pledges already for that amount of money? I mean, assuming, right, it's a $1 lease and then you have to come up with the money for everything else. So do you have, you know, financial commitments from folks that if this were to move forward, that you would have people ready in the wings?
Our proposal in the contingent lease is an arrangement that if we establish a contingent lease, we will have a meaningful purpose for relatively small grantors to utilize a relatively small amount of money to make a big difference. Coming to the grantor, saying, well, we don't have any land, but we would like you to donate this money, seems like a less effective course of action than turning around the other way and saying, we will have a contingent lease. One of the contingencies is that it comes with sufficient money to establish each phase of the project. And so if in the contingency it says we need to have X amount of money like we've proposed, then we, with the contingent lease, can go to any number of grantors and say, we have a contingent lease. If we can fill these slots of money, would you have an a la carte selection of funding for the shower facility or for the porta potties, etc. And so that was our strategy that gives us much more leverage to get that money in the first place.
Okay, and I'll just leave this as my last question, sorry.
Well, can I answer one of your questions you asked me a long time ago?
I don't even remember what it was.
Yeah, you asked me about the suitability of the parcel in terms of capacity of infrastructure, in terms of sewer tie-in, water tie-in, PG&E. I've met with engineering department. There's plenty of sewer capability right by the road. The sewer line is right near the surface as opposed to 20 feet down, so it may not be so difficult. Water is the same way. Had 2 meetings with PG&E. There's absolutely no complication. There's a cost, but there's no complication in access. And in terms of access, there's plenty of access as well. So I believe the infrastructure capability is there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for remembering my question and
Yeah.
answering it. And then lastly, just, you know, since you are proposing a mix of different levels of income, and the models I've seen, you know, do have, you know, residents pay a percentage of their income, you know, whether they make $10 a month or $300 a month, whatever it is. So is that a part of the plan?
Yes, but it's in phases. What we propose is that within some period of time, we're at estimating 5 years, there'll be no more cost to the villagers. This will be a self-sustaining project as opposed to the Housing First model based on SSI or SSDI. We do have I'm sorry, could you restate your question?
Yeah, so my question basically was, given that there's a mix of those that are, without a home on the verge and
Yes.
people that are there for the passion of the
Yes,
project,
yes.
are people going to be paying rent? And I guess I'm speaking more to the people that can afford to pay something, because I
Yes.
recognize if someone's homeless that maybe they don't have any reliable income.
Yes, our goal is to eventually have, whether somebody is employed in the community or having cottage industry or small business industry from the village, that they do pay a percentage of the cost of sustaining the village. Eventually, our goal is to have that completely self-sustaining. Initially, we recognize that that's not practical. So yes, we do want villagers to cover the cost within their capability, but we're not putting that as an entry to participation.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you for taking my
Yes.
fire questions.
So, that's good. Councilmember Watson, do you have any thoughts, questions?
Yeah, just some comments. I don't think I have any questions for the presenters. I agree with everything Councilmember Patino said. I think it would be, definitely ideal if we could, try out multiple projects, support as many projects as we could. We definitely have the need for it. And I absolutely agree with the Vice Mayor as far as that location with the neighboring businesses. I've already heard some conversation from some of those businesses with concerns about it. So I definitely think that would be a really important part, would be to, convince them.
Yes, absolutely.
And, I guess, it'd be a conversation we could have with the staff, but, on that note, while, fully wanting to do this and support this, just to consider, are there other sites that, might be more suitable? And yeah, but at the same time, I'm definitely behind the idea. Thank you.
I have some thoughts, because, I taught sustainable agriculture and permaculture for like 13 or so years up at Humboldt State.
Yes.
And I would assign the students every year really to design a garden, and they often had it, sometimes they would choose their house, sometimes they would choose pieces of land they were associated with, something, and they designed a garden around that. And when I saw your picture, it looked quite a bit like many of the students' gardens that they designed. And so, I recognize just the long-term interest in this type of thing, but then I have to reflect on my experience around these things, because as a person, I've worked in sustainable ag for 40-something years. I've lived in communes, I've lived in teepees and yurts and tents here in Humboldt County, Orleans, Willow Creek. Didn't have a house for years when I first moved here, and I hand-sewed my own teepee. So I kind of know what that's like. And I also know what it's like to start an educational farm, which is in some ways doing many of the things you're encouraging, which is teaching small-scale farming.
Absolutely.
And that now has turned into the Bayside Farm. And so that's run, and so there is this. And there's sometimes I have questions about these types of projects, although I really want to premise it that I'm interested in this type of thing, and I feel like we want to experiment. So I want that to be out there, because I do have a lot of questions about it, and some experience in, so anyway, what I was getting at is sometimes we say, a sustainable village. And that's what reminded me of the students' work. I'd say they would all design their own sustainable village, and it's a romantic idea. But it's, the thing is sort of, I think that's what we're doing here in Arcata.
Absolutely.
That's what I think. And I think we have a lot of educational opportunities for people to do things. So it's not necessarily an absolute separate thing. Although I do understand the need for housing and the need for smaller scale, less zoned, not so much zoned, but less, it has to be past a certain level of kind of building construction, which then you're into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I understand what we're doing with that. But I also, when I hear your presentation, it's very rosy. And a lot of sort of washy words are used, like sustainable and cottage industry, and that, and then we'll grow food, and we'll eat the food, and we'll sell the food, and people will do all these things. So it's just like, I mean, I've had personal experience with all of that. And I kind of know that on an acre with, if there's 30 people, you know, you'll need a lot of that acre just to feed those people, if you're actually feeding those people. Now, someone did, I think you reference that you're bringing food in from other sites, things like that. But another situation that goes through my mind when I think about these things is, you know, in having run farms and different things, it's like the food doesn't grow itself. You actually have to plant it and plant it and take care of it and water it and nurture it. And it takes, I mean, and that's what is potentially a good thing about this. Because nurturing things in the ground nurtures your own soul, nurtures yourself, and there's a lot of love that can occur around that. But to be kind of turning these things out here as if a sustainable village will grow food, will sell food, will have cottage industries, it's like, okay, wait a minute, what are we talking about? We're talking about maybe homeless people, so all of a sudden they become cottage industry managers? I mean, that's kind of a leap that's not addressed. And for me, I need to see a little more of a plan to kind of understand how we're gonna really take people from homelessness to this glorious, sustainable village, you know? So I have just questions there, and I see big leaps. So that's just a thought in my mind. And then the AHA thought, I would love to see a presentation by that, because I do see that maybe addresses more of the housing issue, and isn't trying to paint such a beautiful rosy picture. And don't get me wrong, I love that beautiful rosy picture. I've been working at that imagery and that goal and thought my whole life, really. That's what I've worked on. I promoted sustainable ag, organic food here for a long time. So I really appreciate the thoughts, but I also see that it's not, you can't connect all the dots, really. So that's just something I would have to put out. I mean, just even when you say, well, they'll get equity interest, but then you're going, oh, but not in the city's property. And it's like, okay, well, what are they getting equity interest in? In a house they built with maybe they paid the money, I don't know about that. And then what do we have, really? Then we have houses built and then they're leaving, you know? And so that's like a little confusing. It's just, what are we doing here? Are we teaching people to build small houses? You know, there's just a lot of detail.
Tremendous
that
detail.
needs to be worked out. I think for us to even sell this to the community, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of leaps that, I mean, we could have, like I said, we could support the romance of this concept, but still not be able to explain it to the neighbors. How is this going to work? Well, all of a sudden the homeless are going to be really good cottage industry people, and, you know, I mean, they'll be like, wait a minute. Does that make sense? So those are just some thoughts going through my mind. And then another thought that went through my mind is like addressing sort of the student homelessness. I mean, I think the students have a potential opportunity to work with the housing department up at HSU. And maybe because I mean, like I used to work, I've worked at CCAT, and I was on the board of CCAT for years. That's the Campus Center for Appropriate Technology. And you know, this is the idea they're working on. And, you know, there's a little yurt there, there's people, there's gardens, there's the whole thought. And it's, you know, now as people maybe have a little more resources than the people you're talking about. And even in that situation, it was hard to get the garden always cared for. So there's that, you know. And then, so I just feel like possibly, you know, HSU should be worked with, because, I mean, if we're talking about, I mean, I've heard a few numbers tossed around tonight, 200 homeless, 400 homeless. Someone said, I think, 800 homeless students. And I don't know, I think these numbers we hear, maybe we don't know exactly. It's kind of hard to do point in time counts. But I just see that there's a potential opportunity to work with HSU housing and see if you can do something up there, maybe for homeless students in tiny housing type of things. Because I agree with my fellow council people that we probably can't do this all on one place at one time and one thing. This is going to be, you know, if we move forward with this type of thing, it's a kind of thing that would, you know, I think is what interests us, is trialing something and actually seeing people live and see how it might work. So, you know, I just want to kind of reiterate that in some ways, what you're proposing is already going on here. So I don't want people to not know that you can go volunteer at Bayside Farm and help grow the food that the CSA people are growing there and get food to take back with you. That's already happening. So that's a possibility. And then I'm thinking like, okay, we have the sustainability village. Who's the teachers? Who are the people that are leading these people that are there to go from their sort of state of homelessness to becoming the cottage industry people? I see that there's some possibilities, but that takes effort, and that takes concerted effort. That takes, you almost have to get CR involved, maybe HSU, something. You know, you need sustained effort on these types of things. And so that's a question I have. So I'm just trying to go into my little notes here. Well, that's pretty much sums up what my thoughts are here on my notes. So yeah, I guess to sum it up, just a lot more detail to really promote what you're trying to promote. Like I said, I think you're using this kind of romantic concept that doesn't have enough depth to it for this community to be able to buy it. I mean, I think we can buy the imagery, but we can't step into it and know what we're doing. So there's that. And then I also agree with Councilmember Watson that I think we should look at other places. You know, let's not just be completely stuck on one place. This is where it has to be, this is it, and we're all stuck on this one place. And then even, I mean, to be honest, you were sort of making sort of dreamable relationships that people are giving you free water and free PG&E connections. I mean, that might last for 2 months, but that's not going to keep going on. So there's all this type of thing. I mean, you have to really address those things in a more practical way. And then I also had a question just for our community development director maybe, is would this go to the planning commission? Like if we were going to kind of, I know we did SB2 on that property, which was sort of intended to be sort of emergency housing. And at the time when we talked about that, this house, so this place was bought with economic development money that the city has. And the idea was we were going to have kind of like businesses below, and then maybe when we build that, we'd have some sort of open space, you might say, that was built above for emergency housing for homeless people, particularly under duress situations, things like that. And so that's when we passed this. That was probably 8 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. So I just wondered, would this have to go back to the planning commission to kind of have a conversation? Because that's the way neighbors get notified. And I was thinking about this today. I was in my own garden, and I was thinking, okay, the planning commission. Nobody really likes the planning commission for their own projects, but they love it for their neighbors' projects. And that's really why we have a planning commission, is to kind of keep control on what your neighbors are doing in some ways. So that's just a question I have.
This is a, relative to our current zoning, it's a pretty radical idea. And so we would have to develop new regulations to specifically accommodate it. The SB2 zoning was mentioned earlier, and you're exactly right. The SB2 zoning doesn't encapsulate this concept. It's really for emergency shelters, and so it was a site that was designated for emergency shelter. And this is a different kind of use. So we'd have to go through that public process again if the council directed. So yeah, that site or any other site, I mean, we found as we were developing our SB2 zoning that deciding where to principally permit places where homeless people could live is a really challenging thing to do. So it would have to go back to the planning commission for so the record.
Right. And then just one other thing I just think is important for the public to understand, something that we have to weigh in our minds. And again, I'm saying all these things, it doesn't mean I'm not supportive of this concept, but it's just, these are things we have to weigh in our minds. So let's say we did this, let's say we gave a $1 lease, and we had people living out there, and it's a third students, it's a third community members who are interested, and it's a third homeless people. So then how do we justify, because that's tax dollars that we're giving to people, basically. We're saying, okay, well, we'll seed this project. And we could choose to do that, and we'd have to have findings of why we're deciding to take this tax dollars and put it towards these specific people. And we could possibly do that. But, you know, then we have to actually address Mary over here, who's paying $500 a month for her apartment. And we have to tell Mary, like, well, we're not supporting your apartment, but we are supporting this house over here, and you are paying some taxes to help support this person over here. Mary's maybe not a high-wage worker either. And then she's like, huh? How does that work? How am I paying taxes, whether that's property or payment or rent, which goes to property taxes, or it's, you know, sales taxes or things like that. She's paying into the city of Arcata, and we're taking that funds, and we're supporting this other project.
You want somebody to respond to those questions?
Well, no, maybe let's, at a future time, because I think we're going to invite you back for a future time. But that's just something that we have to understand ourselves and be able to address to any constituents who come up to us, and be able to tell us, you know, tell them, yes, well, this is why we do it, because it's important for this, it's important for that, or things like that. And we have to justify that in our heads enough that we feel good about it. So that's something that we also have to consider here. Because the city of Arcata is not primarily purposed with providing housing. Now, we have people, we want to support people, so again, sometimes saying some of these things you feel like you're cold or something, and I'm not trying to do that. But I'm just trying to say, like, the county actually gets money for housing. The city doesn't. We do have, it's a little bit more complicated than that. We can get some monies through CDBGs and things like that, where we can help provide some affordable housing situations, and we've been able to do that in the city. We have the ABC building, we have the, what's it called, Sandpiper, some different things where we've used some public dollars to be able to do affordable housing, and we see the benefits of that. And I think all of us sitting here also see the interest in this kind of small, tiny house development, and could this solve some of our problems? I think we're interested in that. But anyway, just had those couple of thoughts.
I was just gonna say that I have a lot of similar thoughts to what Susan brought up. I guess where I feel I'm at right now, I know we're gonna have more conversation, so I get the ask that we give direction to staff to start some negotiation on a lease agreement. I'm not there yet because I feel that we, as a public process, need to have a lot of these questions answered and a lot more of that groundwork done before I would feel comfortable saying, okay, let's work on something more behind the scenes with our staff and using staff time towards that. Because I feel like in those conversations, that's where a lot of these questions would still be coming up, and I think those need to be vetted in a public forum. So I'm not in a place where I feel like I can give a stamp of approval for this to move forward, just because there's so many questions that the public needs to hear the answers to. There needs to be that groundwork done so that if this is going to be a city property, that we can make the clearest case possible of here to the average resident in our community. We can explain, here's how it's all going to work. And right now, I don't have that. And I know it's a work in progress, and I know that there's been a little bit of this like chicken or the egg type thing of like, well, we don't want to create this like really in-depth business plan if it's going to get a total thumbs down. But for me, it's helpful to have that information before I can even consider thumbs up or thumbs down. And I think the other thing that would be helpful to be considered as well, I know that maybe there's other city locations, but I think also to do that groundwork of, are there other, private properties or partnerships with churches that also can do this? Because I think showing that you've done that research can just be really helpful for making the case of why it should be on public property. Because as you know, there's a lot more strings attached when it's on public property, right? Versus, if it's on church property or private property. So just wanted to put that all out there of where I'm at tonight, but I want to say thank you for the work that's been done, and I know it's a lot of work, but we got a ways to go before I at least for myself, can feel ready to give direction to staff.
Sophia,
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, a lot of what everybody said. I want to kind of encapsulate it and say, look, I'd like to see AHA come back with a presentation. I think we need to hear them, because obviously there's two competing plans of sorts. And I'd like to give AHA the ability to present what they would like to do. Looking at other locations might help in case we decide to do two. One of each. And I think that we're at a point where having a shelter crisis declared would help us immensely with the codes and flexibility in what we do for emergency or transitional housing for homeless.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely agree with the shelter crisis. So, maybe that's something we can all agree on, maybe not. But I guess I'm curious, what does that entail if we declare the shelter crisis? What is that?
So we were just quietly confabbing on that same concept. Happy to bring you back some details on that at a meeting, maybe at the same meeting that AHA presents, so that seems to be nice.
We could give you a little input now if you would, but.
Yeah,
Hang on.
I think if you want, if you want to like talk with staff on the in-between or something, but I think what we're deciding is that we'll get a report back with staff and what that could mean, and we'll ask